Trauma, featuring Eric Christiansen on alternative health tools, where together we discover alternative health tools and explore integrative healing philosophies for both individuals and practitioners.
I'm Lisa, your co-host from across the pond in the UK, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Eric Christiansen, who is a filmmaker, man in recovery, messenger and healer, and soon to be released Unmasking Hope film, which I'm so excited about. We've been talking off air about all these wonderful things that are coming together, grounded in clinical evidence, working with doctors. And today we're going to be talking about, grief and trauma and how we can identify with that and how we can connect with people to go on that healing journey. And Eric already has given me so much kind of insight into this world, and I can't wait for this podcast. So over to you, Eric. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Oh, definitely. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I'm Eric Christiansen, and like you said, I'm a filmmaker, but I like to refer to myself more as a messenger and to a certain extent a healer, because I take a different kind of paradigm when I'm making my films, and it's become kind of my calling. I'm a husband and a dad of three amazing beings, and I want to call them kids, but they're not kids anymore. But that is a big part of my life. But also healing and making these films is a big part of my life. I've been doing them for the last 30 years. This is my fourth film, Unmasking Hope, my fourth personal film. I've done a lot of other work, including IMAX movies and Discovery and all sorts of other films. But it's great to be here, and I'm excited about what we chose to talk about.
I'm super excited too. And I think it's just such a wonderful kind of, the work that you do complements each other so well. So bringing the filmmaking to healing and helping people on their journeys, I think it's just such a wonderful way to bring that to people. And like we talked off air, it's about, those layerings of the messages throughout the films that can really, really help people on their healing journeys.
It functions on so many levels for me. If it was only me just dealing with the participants in the film, it would be completely fulfilling. In the last few films I've done, I've been able to, accompany trauma survivors to some significant memorials and walk with them through these memorials. And so when one, with my film Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey, I got to go to the wall in Washington, D.C. with Bob Trimble. I was honored to go to the 9/11 memorial with Jack Delaney, a first responder for 9/11, and Becky Lassinger, a survivor of that day. And then I also got to go to the Route 91 memorial in Las Vegas, the mass shooting that 58 people perished. And I was able to go back to Vegas with these two individuals, these two wonderful ladies, and take them to that memorial. So if it was just that, I'd be overpaid, but I get to make a movie too, and after we went to that memorial, the Route 91 memorial with those two women, it was quite a process. It's a tradition to find a rock, paint it, and take it back to the memorial. So we went through that whole process with these two women. We worked with their therapists in conjunction with the film. And then we went back up to Vegas, which they were never going to go back to Las Vegas again. And the biggest compliment I got was, we didn't even notice the cameras there. So that means that our mission was accomplished, the healing mission first. I'm not necessarily a filmmaker. Oh, by the way, the camera was there. And I was able to capture it, and I'm going to make a movie, with that in it. But number one, I'm overpaid already, being able to accompany people to those memorials and be part of their healing.
It sounds like such a privilege, and what an amazing human being you are, Eric, to be able to help people along their journey in such a different way to, a coach or a counselor, or, it's a different route to healing, isn't it?
I was set on this path. June 27th, 1990, I lost my home in the Painted Cave fire disaster in Santa Barbara. And I made my first film after that, called Faces in the Fire, about the recovery after that fire disaster. 7 months after I lost my home, I changed my life. I got clean and sober, and, I saw a gift. God had given me a gift, a clean slate. That's how I started this whole thing, and so it was kind of laid on my plate. I was prepared for this. So I understand what going through, a trauma is. It's actually a gift.
Yeah, and I love what you said there. It's a gift, and one of the words that stands out on your website is hope, and it's turning that trauma into hope, isn't it? And seeing the gift in that moment. And I guess for any of our listeners out there who've experienced trauma and can't see a journey to healing, or they've experienced it really recently, it's knowing that there's hope in the future, and that's what you give people, isn't it?
I try to, and I fully understand when you're in the middle of it, it's really hard to see the silver lining. It's really hard to see over the next hill. And that still happens to me, but I have a picture of the fire, the Painted Cave fire in my office. So when I see that picture up in the office, I'm like, okay, so seemingly the worst day of your life can turn into a turning point for you if you're open and willing to let God work. That's my personal feeling is, guided by a higher power. But that's for me personally. But if you're willing and open to that experience, you can turn these things into a gift. And part of that is giving it away. Part of that is having blazed the trail before somebody else and say, this is how you can get out of here. So going back to like what I said, I understand, especially with the COVID and everything, isolation is terrible. And we can get into a very, very dark spot, and it's hard to see, what the upside of it is. I still struggle with that sometimes when things happen.
Yeah.
But I've had so many examples, and I've got to see so many examples from my film work.
What an inspiration. And talking about being in those places, do you have any tips or tools that you use that you wouldn't mind sharing with our listeners who are perhaps thinking, well, how do I help myself in those moments?
That is such a great question. And what I've done, I've set up a system kind of around me. So an accountability system. I have a man that I call, my mentor and my sponsor, and he's 86 years old, and he's been there, done that. He's a man of God, and I meet with him once a week, and I honestly feel if most men that are in their 50s would listen to other older men, there'd be less divorce, there'd be happier families and things like that, because he's already made all the mistakes, So I've set up a system. What I'm saying is, I've set up a system for myself where I have accountability. But what do you do if you don't have that yet? Well, you know what? You just gotta suck it up and reach out,
Yes.
and if there's anybody in your circle that seems the least bit empathetic, I guess is a great word, reach out to them. It's so hard to transfer hope, and when we're talking about this, I'm imagining those people that are in dire circumstances and perhaps listening to this. It's hard to transfer hope and give you hope, but you know what? There is, and it's just reach out to somebody, and then let me flip that other side, to the person that might see their friends suffering and things like that. It's the easiest thing to do is just offer yourself to them, just show up or give them a call, and don't worry about what you have to talk about. Don't even talk about the situation. That's not what a lot of these people that are going through, and for me, a lot of when I'm going through some sort of crisis, they crave normality. They want some sort of baseline. If you always used to get together and get a pizza and watch a movie, then go do that. You don't have to even mention the problem. If you create the proper space, and I call it holding space. If you create the proper space with those people that are hurting, they'll open up to you, and all you have to do is listen. But please don't give advice. Even I don't give advice. I'm like, but you know what? If it has to do with experience, if I've been there, then I'll tell them my experience. But I'm not going to give advice.
That's just such a wonderful way to kind of phrase it, isn't it? Is if you've been there, you can share your experiences, and show them that there's hope by sharing your experiences. And what I'm hearing from you there is there's two sides of the coin. There's someone that's perhaps experiencing or has experienced trauma and grief, and then there's the other side of the coin who there might be somebody who isn't going through that or hasn't been through that can provide support and just hold that space for another person. So whichever side of the coin you're sat on, you absolutely can be pivotal in supporting people through trauma and grief. And if that's yourself, you mentioned about, if men just kind of listen to other men, I think quite often we're told that we've got to be the strong ones, or there's a phrase, isn't there, we're headstrong. But what's wrong with actually reaching out and saying, I just need some support right now, or putting your hand up and saying, can somebody just please help me? And I love what you said about finding someone who's a bit empathetic. There are people out there when we look for them, aren't there?
Gosh, I can't remember. There's this great quote, but it's about taking an action and how that action creates a space where all sorts of things can happen that you can't even imagine. So by creating an action, and that action could be just reaching out, it's going to create all sorts of other things happening, and that's just the law of the universe. That's a spiritual law for me, is by asking for help, it opens up all these other possibilities, and these things just start appearing. Like my sponsor says, you can sit in the closet and pray for a hot dog, but you're not going to get a hot dog, which means, you got to take the action,
Yeah.
But if you take the action, and then it's going to open up all sorts of other possibilities.
Yeah.
I just, it's funny because I'm just really reaching out mentally to those people that are hurting right now. As I say, offering hope is one of the toughest things.
And it's okay to not feel okay, isn't it? It's just a period in their life that will pass. And what you said there about having the picture of the fire up, it's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, and even when you can't see it, life is a journey, isn't it? And it takes some twists and turns and some dips, and it will pass. It will pass.
Yeah. They say in my program, and this too shall pass. And I love this too. God doesn't close the door without opening a window or another door, right? And but the corollary to that whole thing is, man, I didn't know the hallway was so long.
Yeah. I've not heard that one, but I love it. The hallway's long. Yeah. Yeah. And lots of doors that can open, even when we can't see them, that they might just be a day ahead or a week ahead. And it's that hope again, isn't it? It's coming back to that word hope.
Gosh, there's so many great little tidbits, in my personal recovery, and is, don't leave until the miracle happens, and we don't know what's around tomorrow. I've time and time again, I see that, and I see that with the people that I'm able to interact with in my films. Gosh, there's some great stories. Yeah.
Have you got any that you'd like to share with our listeners that spring into mind?
Actually, I do, matter of fact, because it's just like boom right there. There's a wonderful woman. Her name's Molly. She was actually pregnant. She didn't know she was pregnant at Route 91, and she was there during the Route 91 mass shooting, and she escaped. Then had her baby, and she was kind of like, okay, what were the odds of that happening? That's never going to happen again, and that's kind of off the list now. And she was about, gosh, I don't know, it was about a year or two later, she was at the Borderline shooting here out in Ventura, and she was actually at the second shooting. And that completely shattered her security. Part of trauma is having something taken away from you. And quite often it's security. And it's a sense of being safe. And that was completely taken away from her. And then that loss throws you into an incredible amount of grief. And she became practically a shut-in with her child and everything. And but then there's a great organization called Give an Hour. You can look them up, giveanhour.org. They have a network of clinicians that offer their time to people that have went through traumatic events. They started with veterans, and then they started working with Route 91 and then the Borderline survivors. And she reached out to them. And she got into a little bit of counseling and got some healing. And I just recently saw her doing a follow-up interview about a month or so ago. And she's a peer counselor now for Give an Hour and talking to other people that have went through it. And she is a different person. She is amazing. Like such a different person. She is a light, and it's exactly what we're talking about. There's that hope. And, but she kept fighting, she asked for help, and it doesn't come all at once, and she's still working on it. But, one of the best ways, though, is to help another person. And yes. It's a beautiful story. I'm so proud of her, and I'm honored to be her friend. Those are my heroes.
Yes.
It's like nice cars are nice, great vacations are nice and all that. But my heroes are the people that fought back and then had they were down by double. and then have
Yeah.
fought back and then started helping other people and come back and made a significant impact through what they went through.
And often that happens, doesn't it? That story you've just described is people go through an experience and then that kind of transports them on a different path in life. And, we talked a little bit earlier about it's almost like surrendering and trusting in God's plan or whatever you believe in. There's a bigger plan for us. And sometimes it's just redirection. And if we can have the strength and, have the ability to keep going and put our hands up and ask for help, often that can turn into something beautiful about giving back, can't it?
Oh yeah, and you know what's the oddity of that whole thing is there's a certain familiar factor in misery. When you're in your stuff, one of my sponsors used to say, you're not going to let it go until it's done serving you, and you're like, how is this serving me? I'm in the dumps, and you're not going to let it go. But people, there's a certain familiarity in being miserable and being in that spot. And so when you're presented with the idea of, like, I guess you would say God's way, it's a big unknown. You're like, what is his plan? I don't want to do it. I have no idea. I'm very familiar with my little apartment here and staying in and ordering food in and being isolated. But there's a huge world and letting go of that into the unknown, like we're talking about, like Molly. Molly had no idea she'd end up a peer counselor when she started counseling with Give an Hour, and pretty.
It's life's a journey, isn't it? And that's why I've got the sign up behind me that life begins at the end of your comfort zone. It's just,
I love that. Yeah.
It's just so true, isn't it? If we can just take that step, and it just has to be a step at a time. You don't have to think about the long journey or the long corridor. It's about taking a step and seeing what's the next door that's able to open.
People are so connected with the familiar, and it's just like the same old, go to the same restaurant, order the same thing, and there's a certain comfort in there. But you're right, life does begin. I look at the scale of adventure and comfort zone, and I have a couple friends that are just so, they're particularly surfers. I grew up a surfer, and talking about, like, the end of their comfort zone, they'll just come back. They used to come back to the States, get enough money, and then just disappear, go to France. Where are you going? I'm going to France to surf. Where are you going to stay? I don't know. And it's like, then you kind of look at them. Certain people look and go, look at those vagabonds. It's like, they're just, but look at that life. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like, then, I get these back in the day when you used to get postcards and letters. I get these, oh my gosh, I found this place and I'm staying with this guy and I got this job painting houses in front of the Kira, in Australia, this perfect, and they've created this, like, adventuresome life way beyond. I don't know why I just brought that up, but I think I'm somewhere on the lower part of that scale. I'm still in the safety zone sometimes, and to bring it back to what we're talking about, actually, is I'm trying to, like, get way out of my comfort zone and where I want to take Unmasking Hope as a film, and I look at all my past work and I'm like, you know what, I really have to take this to another level, and that involves so many different ideas, and if everything worked as an artist, there'd be no risk. If you can go, man, I got this crazy idea, I'm going to do this, and it always worked, there's no risk. But I have so many ideas and so many places I want to take this film, and so far it's working, but it is a big risk.
So on the Unmasking Hope film, like, can you just share a little bit about that and where the idea was born out of, and your ideas that are coming to fruition and how that's unfolding? Are we allowed a sneak kind of, I know obviously the trailer's out and people can see that on YouTube, but are we allowed kind of a sneak kind of behind the scenes, what's going on in your mind and why this is so important for you and how this kind of came to fruition?
Well, that's a great question. And I gotta admit, there is a part of this, to me, it's I call them my theses. Each film has a thesis, and I was so naive when I did Face in the Fire, like over 30 years ago. I just knew kind of by intuition what I should do. And I interviewed a lot of survivors, and everybody's like, well, you're not just telling one story. And I'm like, I have a feeling it's all going to fit together. But it was about one incident, and everybody had the commonality of one incident, even though they're different ages, different sexes and everything. And so, when that was done and I put that together, I'm like, wow, they're all telling the same story. So that little thesis worked, Then there was Homecoming, a Vietnam Vet's Journey, and I interviewed 6 different Vietnam vets, and they each told a different part of the same story. I wanted a big, broad variety of different experiences. And I had a gentleman named Fat Cowboy, and he was a Korean, Purple Heart Korean Marine War veteran from Kansas, salt of the earth. I mean, he's like a guy like Slim Pickens in the movies, And then I had this woman, Sandra Lee, who was a female veteran out of New York. I'm like, what did they really have in common? I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, that was my thesis, trying to put them all together, along with the World War II vet, current vets, all these people, and it worked. So getting to Unmasking Hope, my thesis is even broader now. We're not just doing veterans. We have a veteran in it, Sandra Lee. Actually, I take one individual from my past film and I put it into my next film. Sandra Lee's in it; she's a veteran. But I also have mass shooting survivors, 9/11 survivors. I have an African American gentleman that was molested at 7 years old by somebody that he trusted. There's 1 in 6 men, that are sexually molested. So we have that. We have the 9/11 survivors. We have another incest survivor. So how are all those going to fit together? And that's my big thesis with this. And that's where Unmasking Hope came from. I'm like, I'm gonna really mix it up with this, and I'm gonna see if my thesis that we all heal basically the same. We're all telling the same story, even though it's really different.
Yes.
Sandra Lee's experience is very different than the mass shooting survivors, and Unmasking Hope, the title, my good friend Pam Pyre came up with the title, and it's about taking off that mask, because after trauma we put on a mask, and
Yes.
and all these people put on different masks, and that mask, I was talking to Dr. Amit Ekin this last week from Stanford University. That mask serves a purpose at first. It allows that woman to get up and make dinner, or make lunch for her kids, get them off to school, et cetera, et cetera. But after a while, that mask sticks on us, and we have to lose that mask after a while, and unmask our hope. And so that's kind of where the whole film came from. So it's a spiritual progression from my other films, but we have a very big analogy with the mask, and the lyricism with the mask. And that's where I'm taking another chance with this film, is diving it more into the lyrical and trying to explain the journey of the trauma survivor in a more lyrical way. But that's where Unmasking Hope is.
I love it. And oh gosh, what an inspiring journey that people won't be able to wait until this comes out. When are we going to be able to see this film?
October 10th right now, October 10th, 2022. And it's World Mental Health Awareness Day. And so we're working with hopefully a couple partners in the release. It's going to be on public television here in the United States, and hopefully available on a couple different VOD platforms. So
fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to getting in the middle of it. I'm still slogging through all the prep because it's a huge project.
I'm excited for you, and I feel connected to it already. And one of the things you said there is you're bringing lots of different people together who've had different experiences. And we talked about connection, didn't we? And one of the things that connects everybody is that feeling. They've all felt the same way. They've all experienced that feeling, even if it's been through a different experience or journey. And I think it's amazing that you're bringing so many different people together to inspire that hope, to say no matter what experience you've had, there's other people that felt this way too, and there's hope for the future.
It's really exciting. That's my big risk on this too. I think everything will fit together. I already know it will. It's a matter of taking my time and doing that and putting it together. But also we have, with this film too, we have a lot of clinical support. Mm-hmm. As I said, I just interviewed Dr. Amit Ekin last week from Stanford University. I've known him for over 8 years. He was a clinical supervisor on the last film and this film also. But he talks about being able to clearly see all the different connections in between all these different events, all these different kinds of traumas. And so by using the clinicians and using that as a kind of a grounding piece, that's really going to help the stories stick together. And then I mentioned also Dr. Catherine Shear, and we explore a lot of the grief issues that are involved in trauma, because I think trauma has gotten to be such a buzzword. We're forgetting a whole other half of what happens after that loss from the trauma.
Yeah, that's really interesting point to raise, Eric. It's grief is and trauma, they're kind of words that are just bandied around, but it's irrelevant how big the trauma or the grief is. If you're feeling it, aren't you? And how does grief and trauma fit together? You kind of raised that point. Should we just share with our listeners so they can kind of understand and see whether or not they can identify with that, like we talked about, that identification process, to see if that's something that needs some support with?
I think we all need support with grief. I think grief is a very universal type of event, when we lose a loved one. And there is trauma associated with losing a loved one. But the trauma isn't at the level of causing what you would call PTSD. But with a PTSD event, something at that level, like a 9/11, there's still an amazing amount of grief. I mean, trauma kind of is the event, and it doesn't last. It's an event in time. And unfortunately, with severe trauma, it does get frozen in the brain. I mean, literally, it gets, and then you have to work through that. But the secondary kind of, I don't want to say complement each other, but they run, it's a logical progression to have the grief. And with the 9/11 survivors and a lot of traumas, they've lost their sense of security. All they were doing is going to work that day,
Yeah.
and, I find it very fascinating. I've worked in the veterans space for a very long time. And, the veterans, to a certain extent, they know what they're getting into. It doesn't take away from the impact of the trauma.
Yes.
But when I'm now interviewing civilians that have just went to a country music concert and then were fired upon, that kind of trauma, they didn't sign up for that. It's a whole different kind of a shattering of their security. But it goes back to that loss. And Dr. Catherine Shear says trauma is basically loss and yearning. It's that something's gone now.
Yeah.
It never completely comes back, but we learn how to incorporate that into our lives. We learn healthy workarounds. We learn how to, and part of incorporating loss into our lives is rituals and memorials.
Yeah.
And understanding the truth about what happened to us, and also honoring it and going to those memorials. And it's a big part of the healing, because it releases that pressure valve just a little bit each time you return. And I saw that with the Route 91 survivors in Las Vegas.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, very inspiring to kind of give people that hope, to say it doesn't go away, but it releases that pressure valve when you do the memorials. And I guess it's that community coming together, isn't it? And that support.
It's so many things. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of it is about community, going into the memorials and being part of the community, and also accepting it. This did happen to me. I am part of this community.
Yeah.
It's a big part of it. And then identifying with others and sharing.
Yeah. And I think that acceptance has to come before we can change and move forwards. And when you talk about moving forwards, you talked about workarounds, and it's not about burying it or pretending it never happened. It's about finding those workarounds and finding a way forwards, isn't it?
Then Dr. Shear says it's about incorporating it into your life in a healthy way. Because as I said, it never fully goes away. It's something that these individuals struggle with every day, but we incorporate it and we find ways to work with it in our lives, and then get a full life.
So for any of our listeners out there are thinking, well, how do I incorporate that into my life in a healthy way? What types of, we've talked about memorials and things like that, and reaching out to people. Are there any other tips you could give people that can incorporate it in a healthy way?
number one is reaching out to other groups, other people like you. But also, with my stuff, I love talismans. Talismans, just little special reminders. And I have them all over the place. I have melted glass from my house, and I remember that. And I have certain things like all over my office that I'm looking at right now that means something to me, that I can look at. It reminds me about this is part of my life, my recovery chips and stuff like that. It's like, and it supports me, and time does matter, the 4th, 5th anniversary. Anniversaries are a big deal. And being able to celebrate is definitely not the right word, but be able to recognize those dates when they come through, all those things. And the other thing is, again, the people around you, creating a sense of normalcy around these things.
Yes.
And not the oddity of it,
Yes.
and being comfortable with that person that and sometimes they've changed a lot. So you have to kind of pivot a little bit to meet them, but meet them in their own space.
Yeah, I like that. Meet them in their own space and pivoting. It's often people, when they go through change, we expect them to be the person that they were before, and quite often they're not, because they've had quite a life-changing event happen. And it's about taking that step back, is what I'm hearing from you, and saying meet them where they're at and hold that space for them and pivot slightly if that's what they need.
And not making a big deal out of it. That's the biggest thing. Even if you're not a clinician and you don't know all the buzzwords and everything, you can still be a big help to your friends.
Yes.
Just by listening.
Yeah.
And unfortunately we've lost the ability to listen. I know so many men my age just waiting for their chance to talk, and they're not listening to you. I'm like, it's not really easy to listen. You really have to. It takes a little bit of a risk. There's a little bit of empathy to really listen to somebody that's in pain. Open up yourself to them and try to put yourself in their shoes, and not think about what you're going to say next. Think about like being there for them and making that eye contact.
Yeah.
Uncomfortable sometimes.
Being present, isn't it? Like you say, and holding that space for them, and the conversation that flows rather than waiting to speak. It's, well, what's this person saying, and why is that important to them, and can I pick up on that? And I just remember once somebody said to me, "You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio."
Yes, I've heard that one too. Yeah.
And, when people are busy and they've got places to be and things to do, quite often, it's easy to just be a step ahead of yourself rather than present in that conversation. So I think that's such a wonderful kind of tip from you, Eric, is just to be present in that moment, really listen to what your friend's saying, because they might be giving you so much information as to how they're feeling, but without saying it.
Part of my recovery is helping other guys from recovery from drugs and alcohol, is helping other guys, new guys. And it's so funny. Inevitably, they'll call me up and they'll go on and on and on. And I'll barely have to say anything. This is going on and this is going on. And by the end of the conversation, I'll barely say anything. And they just needed a sounding board. And they already worked like 80% of it out in their head. It's like, and just being a good sounding board.
You're holding that space for them again, aren't you? And like you say, often we have the answers within us. We just need that space to work through it.
Exactly. And that's what I do in my interviews. We're very particular, on our sets about who's there, about how we set this up, and I've done so many of them now. It's actually kind of fascinating searching for home, coming back from war, my film, my transcript books. We had 1,100 pages of transcripts, and there would be a little red tab every 20 pages or so, the stuff that we needed to use. Wow. With Unmasking Hope, my skills have changed with interviewing, and we have a red tab on every page. It's just amazing. Like there's a wealth of great things. I'm like, and then I read it back, and I'm like, they told me that? Oh my gosh! It's just like, that's like two souls talking to each other.
That's powerful, isn't it? Two souls talking to each other.
It's really an honor to be able to get on that kind of basis with the individual, and them allowing you that kind of access. And Sandra Lee in my current film, Unmasking Hope, she was also in my film Searching for Home, Coming Back from War. And I have a tradition of taking from my last film one of the people and putting it in my next film. And Sandra Lee was that person. But I've gotten to know her so well. And she opens up in these interviews, and I'm just so honored, to be not only be like working with her in the film, but also be her friend. It's pretty amazing going from PTSD and military sexual trauma in Iraq to she's very happily married, found a great guy. We were invited to the wedding, and we covered the wedding and everything. It was great. Anyways.
What an amazing story.
Lots of healing.
Yeah, lots of healing.
Yeah.
Oh, Eric, this is phenomenal. And I think our message to our listeners is hope, isn't it? That no matter what trauma or experience you've had, or even if it's just grief, there's hope.
And grief can drag you very deep because, grief feeds depression. Grief feeds anxiety, and they're all connected, in our crazy little brain. And so, like we were saying, you need to find a little outlet, to be able to let some of that pressure off, to connect with somebody. And it could be a professional, it could be your brother, it could be one of your best friends.
Oh, Eric, is there anything else you wanted to share with our listeners today? I mean, you've already shared loads, but if there's a final kind of parting message of hope, what would that be?
I don't want to make it all about me, but, telling all these stories it takes a lot of organization and a lot of time to truly tell the story. And this is not necessarily something that's inspirational, but what's interesting about art, all good art comes from a place of like really good preparation, and from writing your book, we can't just sit down and write a book. There's so much prep. That's just kind of what's on my heart right now is, I'm going through all that prep. I cut storylines for each individual. There's 8 different individuals in the film, and I cut a storyline for each one of them. Then I cut the film once I know their storylines inside and out. And art takes preparation. It's just not inspiration. So that's what I was thinking about.
I think that's wonderful. And I think that ties quite nicely into the fact that even if you can't see what you're going through right now, and the reason why you're going through it right now is it could almost be that work of art that turns into something that creates something beautiful in your future that you can use as a springboard to help others or help yourself move forward on this wonderful journey of life.
That's a great analogy because this is my 4th personal film. I know it's already actually created somewhere. I love that one saying is you chip away everything that's not the statue. And I've been through this before, so I know it. But I also know that when I sometimes go through tragedies, I know that there is hope and that something cool will be created out of this. And maybe that is, where we, kind of plant our flag is even you're in the middle of it, just know people have went through it and that there is hope on the other side if you just take a couple small actions and keep moving forwards.
Take action, move forwards, and trust. It's what you said earlier, wasn't it? It's trust that there's a bigger plan sometimes, and just be willing. You said earlier to be willing to move forwards.
Exactly.
Yeah. Eric, it's been a wonderful pleasure to have you on the show. I thank you for your time, and I feel really humbled to have been able to spend this time with you and learn more about your wonderful work. It is really inspiring. Really inspired me, and I guess if anybody wants to follow you, I know from the professional point of view, they can see what you're doing from ecproductions.com, and then with the Unmasking Hope, they can go to unmaskinghopethemovie.com if they want to find out more. And I'm super excited. I can't wait for Mental Health Day, and I'll be definitely trying to find your movie, your film, however I can in the UK. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.